everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Northwest Craftsman. Today I have a slightly different but very woodworking centric project, and that is going to be refinishing my kitchen countertops. When we moved into this house, the kitchen countertop had all sorts of damage to it, and we loved it because it was a butcher block, but we knew that at some point we were going to have to refinish it. And what ended up happening just very recently is right around the sink, a little bit of water got underneath the polyurethane and just pop, came all right off the top. So today I'm going to be removing everything on here, and I'm going to be applying a new coat of polyurethane. So I'm going to quickly time lapse through the cleanup and removal of the sink process right here, and then we'll go through and start talking about what I am going to do to get this guy refinished, so that if you have a similar situation, you know how to do it yourself. Alrighty, once the counters are clear, the first step is to clean up everything. So I'm going to go ahead and vacuum everything off and get all this caulk off from where the sink was. Then I'm going to go through and just make sure that all of this is somewhat clean, so that when I start sanding everything down, I am working on the finish and not on all the gunk that's on top of the surface. Next, I'm going to take my random orbital sander and I'm going to work my way up from 80 grit to 120 grit to 220 grit. Probably don't need to go all the way up to 220. I found 120 to be sufficient in most cases, but I am going to take it all the way up to 220 in this case. And you do not need to get a nice fest tool. I have a $100 DeWalt random orbital sander that would work just fine. This just has a pure rotary setting that's going to allow me to chew through this finish a lot quicker, but a straight random orbital sander will work just fine for you. Oh, also an important note, make sure that you have this hooked up to your shop vac. Otherwise, your whole entire house is going to get filthy dusty and it's not going to be a good time. So get good dust collection on this. As a reminder, because I always remind myself, make sure to change your pads out often enough because it will make your life so much easier. It is worth the 50 cents to $1 it's going to take to swap that guy out so much faster. Okay, off to the 80 grit, onto the 120 grit. Alrighty, and with all of that sanding done now, I took it up to 220. I didn't go beyond 220 because it's worked out fine for me in the past to go only up to 120 because most of the smoothness that I've gotten in the past on the top of my finish comes from the self-leveling when you get multiple layers on there. So in this case, the plan is to first clean all of this off with a little bit of mineral spirits. So you can take a tack cloth. I'm going to do mineral spirits in a paper towel or a lint-free rag. And I'm going to go across the surface here to get all the rest of the sawdust off here. I vacuumed all of it off, but I really want to make sure that it's totally clear. And then we're going to go through and apply our first coat of polyurethane, making sure that we get nice, even coverage of everything here. Yeah. Alrighty, let's get that tack cloth. This is always a good reminder for me, but this is the cloth that I use to clean off all the counters, and this is what it looked like before. So even though I vacuumed off all the different surfaces, there is still a ton of sawdust and nastiness that will come off the surface. So always make sure to wipe it down with a solvent of some kind if you have the ability to. And the reason for a solvent is because it'll all evaporate very quickly so that we can get on to the next step. But because it's mineral spirits and not lacquer or thinner or something, I'm going to give it about 20 minutes so that it can volatilize. Make sure that it's all gone before I come through and start applying the polyurethane. But in the meantime, I'm going to go through and start applying tape around all the different areas so that we don't get polyurethane on anything that we don't want to get polyurethane on. Alrighty, and so for this step, we're going to be applying the polyurethane. I am going to be doing 3 coats of polyurethane, and this first coat is really truly just intended to seal the wood. I am planning on doing a sanding after this, and so I am not as concerned about making sure that this is purely bubble free and purely thick enough that I'm going to get real run together, making sure that it's going to self-level itself. So you're going to see me go through this coat a little bit more quickly. I'm going to get even. My goal is to get even coverage across everything, to put it on thick enough that I get a little bit of leveling, but not so much that I trap bubbles deep in the layer. I really want to make sure that it's thin enough that I seal it, but make sure I don't trap any bubbles. Layer 1 of polyurethane done. We're going to let this sit overnight, and then tomorrow morning we will tack it all again, sand it with 120 lightly all the way across just to get it nice and smooth from any bubbles or waves that were left behind from this coat. And then we'll go ahead and do a second coat just like that. Go a little bit slower so that I can make sure that I get it a little bit more even so that it flows nice and evenly over the top to form me a nice smooth surface. And then I'm just going to cut to the chase so that we have the ability just to film this. The third coat is going to look very similar. I'm going to sand it again very smooth, and then I'm going to go ahead and do another layer over the top of that. Again, that's 4 hours in between, though for me it's probably going to be closer to 8 to 10 just because I'll be doing it before work and after work. So just plenty of time for it to cure. Sand it smooth, put a final layer on, but on each layer getting slower and slower and a little bit more smooth all the way around, making sure that I'm working out all the bubbles and everything so that it would get a nice pristine finish on the top. Well, thank you guys for joining me today. I really appreciate having you around. A couple of the lessons that I learned during this process that I wanted to talk about is that 120 grit is totally fine through the initial portion of the process, because when we build up that polyurethane, or when I built up that polyurethane, all the layers very much covered any of the stray fragments or grains or anything else that was kind of popping up and through it. So 80 grit takes everything off nice and quick, 120 gives it a nice finish. And then I actually ran out of 120 grit paper for the following sandings that you wanted to do, or that I wanted to do. And so I moved up to 320 because that was the only paper that I had on hand, and that seemed to work just fine. It knocked down all of the high spots that I needed to get it nice and smooth. But one of the reasons why you do the sanding between layers is because that actually provides a mechanical bonding interface for that upper layer of polyurethane. You're not actually co-linking or cross-linking any of those polymers between those layers, and so you need something that it can grab onto, and the 320 seems to work fine. I guess theoretically it could fail in the next couple of years if that was too smooth, and so I'd get debonding between layers, but as of now I think it's going to work just fine, and it looked like it worked just fine as I was applying it. The third thing that I would say, and I didn't quite get to the level that I wanted to, is that as you approach your final layer or on your final layer, plan to do a much thinner layer. When I was applying the polyurethane straight, it was very thick, which works well for making sure that you get a nice thick layer across the surface. But the problem I ran into is that I would go through, I could only really apply maybe 6 inches or 8 inches at a time to keep a wet edge. So I'd work my way all the way down, move to the next spot, work my way all the way down. But then when I look back, you get all of these different lines that are in there. And so what I tried to do, and it works on smaller pieces, and it actually worked on some smaller counters that I did in the kitchen as well. I only showed you the large counter. But if you do one big brush stroke right at the very end while everything is still wet, then you can get nice even brush strokes all the way through that will then self-level between all of that. The problem on the long table is that it was too long, so I went back to the original and kind of pulled the polyurethane with it, and so I actually ended up getting thin spots in those regions. And I thinned it out to about 10 or 15% for my final layer. Honestly, I would probably double that to 20 or 30% if I was to do it over again, because it was still too thick. And maybe it was that the mineral spirits I was using and the polyurethane started to separate out again. I mixed it up very well at the beginning. But I would, anyways, if you're gonna do it, try to go with a much thinner layer and probably plan on doing a 3rd coat that is that thin layer and a 4th coat over the top of that if it really isn't applying as thinly or as smoothly as you need to, so you can really focus on getting that. I'm just under a time constraint because my family's out of town right now, and I wanted to do this while they were out of town, so I didn't have any of the hassle of having kids around the house or needing to live in the kitchen. So I got to get everything put back together, so we're going to deal with what is there right now. It's still much, much better than it was previously, but as a perfectionist, it kind of bothers me that there's still some brush strokes in there. So anyways, thank you guys for joining me again. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave it in the comment section down below. I'd love to talk to you about the project that you guys are doing, and yeah. Thank you guys tons. Go make something beautiful. Talk to you later.